So now for a very special conclusion to our symposium, the ideal final act for us today on this subject. We've heard so much about collector philanthropists and civic-minded people throughout the symposium that this is a fitting conclusion indeed. This will be our conversation between Linda Ferber and Alice Walton. And needless to say, we did not have to think long or hard as to which active collector of American art we would most like to invite to the Frick stage this afternoon. And we were truly delighted that Alice accepted our invitation, knowing that her friendship with Linda over the years made the prospect of this conversation that much more appealing to her. As I'm sure everyone in this audience knows, Alice Walton is a committed patron of the arts and a philanthropist. She led the Walton Family Foundation's founding of the Crystal Bridges Museum of American Art and serves as chairwoman of the museum's board of directors. She's a board member of the Walton Family Foundation as well, not surprisingly. The establishment of the museum and its impact within the region has prompted numerous accolades for Alice. She's the recipient of the Smithsonian Institution's Archives of American Art Medal, the American Federation of Arts Cultural Leadership Award, the John Cotton Dana Medal for Visionary Leadership in Museums, and the Lenore and Walter Annenberg Award for Diplomacy through the Arts for her significant philanthropic contributions. She was recognized by Time magazine as one of the most influential people in the world. Beyond her vision for Beyond her vision for Crystal Bridges, Alice has remained committed to improving the quality of life in her home state. She was the first chairperson and driving force behind the Northwest Arkansas Council, an organization that played a major role in securing the development of the Northwest Arkansas Regional Airport, improving transportation infrastructure throughout the region. She's also established Camp War Eagle, which offers Northwest Arkansas children of differing socioeconomic backgrounds an exceptional summer camp experience. Alice is the daughter of Helen Walton and Sam Walton, the founder of Walmart, and she began her career in finance and later founded Yama Company, an investment bank. She has served as a member of the board of the Amon Carter Museum in Fort Worth, Texas, and the Trustees Council of the National Gallery of Art in Washington. She holds a bachelor's degree from Trinity University and an honorary Doctor of Arts and Humane Letters from the University of Arkansas. And lastly, on a personal note, I'd like to add that I recently visited Crystal Bridges with my husband following the President's Day holiday, and we've spoken of little else since that marvelous day that we spent at the museum, soaking in Alice Walton's extraordinary achievement, the exceptional collection, stunning architecture and setting, and above all, the warm esprit de corps among the smart and energetic staff there. It's truly a gift to our country, not just to Northwest Arkansas, and I urge each and every one of you to put Bentonville very high on your bucket lists. So now, without further ado, please join me in welcoming Alice Walton and Linda Ferber.
On that note, I want to begin by asking anybody, all of you who have been to the museum, raise your hands. Fantastic. Yay. Okay, great. This is called crowdsourcing. Well, yesterday and today, just a few words to sort of set this terrific opportunity in the context of the events of yesterday and today. We've been hearing great papers about the motives, the tastes, and the passions. Oh, I have to use the mic? Okay. Usually my voice carries. Okay. We've been hearing terrific papers about the motives and the tastes and the passions of 19th century collectors of American art, and in many cases, the role that a kind of cultural nationalism may have played in their decisions to share these collections with the public. Now, unlike the subjects of our papers, you are here to tell us what I'll call the genesis stories of your extraordinary project. I know our audience is eager to hear the genesis of your passion for American art first, and the moment that, if it wasn't a moment, a threshold moment when you realized that you were a collector. And of course, the sources of inspiration for your decision to found a museum, as well as your goal to place a great public collection, as Inga mentioned, of American art in what I'll call in general the heartland. And it's more than 5 years out. So we were there at the opening, and it's extraordinary that, in a way, that 5 years have passed. And I'm curious to know, on behalf of the audience, what did you expect? What are the wonderful things? Are there any unexpected outcomes? And I would also be curious to know whether there are any, in a sense, disappointments or goals that you feel like you have to reach. So anyway, I know that you have spoken about these things before, and you have an eager audience. And please, Alice.
Thank you, Miss Linda. I'd first like to start off by thanking the Frick and Inger and Ian for making this wonderful symposium available. I had to miss yesterday because I was under the weather, but I have been here today, and it's been fabulous. Can you hear me? So thank you all so much, and I could talk about American art forever, so please bear with me. I'm going to start. You asked me a lot of questions, so I'll see if I can remember them all. I'm going to start, I think, with my childhood, because that's where it all started with most of us. So I grew up in a town of 2,500 people in the Ozark Mountains. My dad was a merchant, and we were a regular middle-income family going to public schools. There was one thing that I really loved doing from an early age on, and that was drawing and doing watercolors. I had no connections to art, really. No, my mother loved music, but was not really that oriented to art, but she always encouraged me in my little charcoals and my watercolors. And we grew up, my dad would always I had 3 older brothers, 4 of us in 5 years. My dad would take us on summer camping trips, and we'd go to a different section of the country each summer for a month and camp out in the national parks with all of us cooking and camping, and cleaning and sightseeing along the way. And so that and those were the times when I really got into painting landscapes and drawing landscapes wherever we went. So that was really my connection to art. Still my most memorable honor, one of them in my life, is when I got honorable mention in the 4th grade for a portrait of an Indian girl. So that's my claim to fame. But it was that background, and I would say that connection to nature that had a very, very strong influence on my love of art. And when I first met, I went to maybe 2 museums, 3 museums by the time I graduated from high school, because they were 8 hours away. They were, one was 3.5 hours away, the Gilcrease in Tulsa, which was Western art. But growing up where I grew up, we just really didn't have access to art. And so I started my collection, started with local artists, with ceramics, with great woodworkers that are from the Ozarks, and local watercolors, of course. And then as I continued painting throughout my life until about 15 years ago. And one of these days I'll get back to it, I hope. But as I continued to paint, I started going to museums whenever I came to New York on business. And I saw a couple of watercolors by Winslow Homer. And that kind of changed my life. That would have been in the late 90s, I think, Linda. Mm-hmm. And I went, oh, this is what it's all about. And I realized when I saw the price tags associated with them that I better learn a little more about what I was doing. So that's when I started getting my first art history books. It was in the late 80s, early 90s. And when I made that connection, that's what put me over the top. And I'll backtrack a little bit. The reason for American art is I never thought about any other kind of art, frankly. My dad was very patriotic, and I was an American history buff, and so it was just kind of a natural outgrowth of that period. But when I made the connection between, and I call it seeing history in 3D, when I really understood what a vibrant, complex painting you could make of the history of this country, which is what I learned through art books, that's when I got totally hooked. And when I first started thinking about, wow, if I can share what I am learning and getting through art with people in my part of the world that really just don't have that access, then that's an important thing for America, and an important thing that I can do. So that's kind of where it came from.
And were there particular models, whether other institutions or individuals associated with institutions, that helped you focus that idea? Absolutely.
And like I said, it starts with that early encouragement by my mom. I've got to give her most of the credit there. And then a fabulous lady that some of you all I know knew, Ruth Carter Stevenson, when I moved to Texas, became a combination of a great mentor and a best friend and a second mom after my mom passed. And so I have to give great respect to Ruth. She taught me so much. And then John Wilmerdine.
Of course, yes.
And you.
Well, thank you. That was later in the game, but thank you.
Not too much later.
Yes.
Not too much later. I have to tell a little story on Linda. So we had already started building the museum, and we were probably 3 or 4 years from opening.
Yes, it was.
And Linda, everybody had told me about Linda. And so I met Linda, and she offered, I'd met you at Brooklyn originally.
Asher B. Duran brought us together.
Asher B. Duran brought us together, that's exactly right. And Linda's love of the pre-Raphaelite.
Yes, that too.
And mine. And so Linda was at New York Historical by this time, and she offered 4 years before we opened Crystal Bridges to give us the Hudson River Show, which is the most unbelievable leap of faith I can imagine. And I'm forever grateful, my dear. And we did get open.
Well, it was a leap of faith, but it was a carefully considered leap of faith. Alice is referring to the traveling show from the New York Historical Society's collection, Nature and the American Vision. And we traveled the show. We decided to travel those works while the museum was under renovation. And we reached out to a number of institutions. And Crystal Bridges, as a concept and an idea that was being realized, was well underway, but we felt it would be wise if they were the last of the 4 venues. And indeed, it was very exciting.
We made it, it was.
We made it, yes, we made it.
I think we had 120,000 visitors to that exhibition over 3.5 months. It was amazing, and it meant so much to have the great Coles and the Asher B. Durans, all those great paintings. They'd never been to our part of the country, so it was a really, really special thing for us. I can't go forward any further without talking about my dear friend John Wilmerdine, too, from Princeton. I wanted to reach out, and I knew, that I needed help and expertise in the collection. I am an avid art history reader and an amateur historian, I guess.
Say a deeply committed amateur.
But Ruth had mentioned John Wilmerdine to me, and our art lawyer at the time had mentioned John. So I reached out to John and told him about my hopes for a museum, and this was in 2003, I think, 2004. And he got it. He understood, and he realized how important it was to you know, that I have good guidance. And he saw that we were willing to wanted a collection of the very highest quality. So John became a consultant to us and had one of our founding board members. And I can't tell you how invaluable that relationship has been, and never mind how much fun we have. It's going on trips with John and our first director, Don Bacigalupi, and it's fascinating. Don comes from the contemporary side. John knows everything, I think, but focused historically. And just what I learned through the process of those discussions is really amazing.
Well, I think what you learned and the nature of that collaboration has defined, in a sense, the collection in an evolving way. Because I think at first the emphasis, the basis, the foundation of the collection, which makes sense, is historical. And then you've, in a sense, come in to the late 20th century and now even beyond.
It's been interesting because I wanted not, because I so much love being a part of the collection process, I wanted to focus on collecting where I had been studying and not where I didn't know anything, which makes sense, I guess. And so we really did start with the Hudson River and that period and work our way forward, and then backwards some as well when some great historic paintings became available. And I want to talk about the Hudson River part of it because you had such an influence in helping putting that collection together, in that group of paintings.
It was a pleasure. It was a pleasure. Well, one thing I have to say that I've learned today is that, in a sense, your way into the childhood experience is extremely interesting, but it's interesting also that it's Homer watercolors, in a sense, that first galvanized your look back, both at a watercolor tradition in this country and also at the highest level of performance. That's something that I didn't know. I would have assumed perhaps that it was oil paintings of the Hudson River School that first caught your attention. It's fascinating.
The Crystal Bridges collection was originally entirely watercolors, just because that's what I loved. And at that point, I'm not sure that a museum was on my mind. It was personal. And so it started with Homer in the mid-1800s. And then the oils came really, a few of the oils came early on, a few of them, but it was predominantly watercolors when it first started. And then, we obviously transferred a much bigger focus to the oil on canvas piece. But I fell in love with the Hudson River painters, and it's so fascinating to me. And we do have a great collection. I'm thrilled about that. Yeah. But I've learned a little bit. In the process of putting the museum together, we've also put together a pretty good library on American art. And we've bought several different collections and artist papers along the way. And so I got into the library looking at some of the letters from the Hudson River painters, Thomas Cole and Asherby Durand, I've forgotten who else, Ennis. Cropsey, yes. And we have a letter that kind of reminds me of my own personal relationship to nature. But we have a letter signed jointly by a lot of the artists in our Hudson River collection to their state senator, pleading for Congress to stop the environmental destruction of the eastern forests. and basically a statement that the forests are the manifestation of God and divinity, and you cannot do that. And this had to have been in about 1840. So I was in awe when I saw that letter, and it just reminded me, and then I understood why I love the Hudson River paintings so much, because they take me back to my childhood and the time we spent in those national parks.
Well, in a sense, the national parks, the securing of tracts of wilderness for the American public and in perpetuity, in a sense, comes out of that same impulse. And so it's, the association is there. And I think also, could you talk a little bit about the remarkable site that you chose for the museum? Because I think it's one of the most distinctive aspects of the experience, and I think it speaks to the values that you just outlined.
So really looking back at it, because of my family's connection to nature, and this piece of land actually the museum sits on 120 acres, 2 blocks from the Bentonville town square. So the town grew up around us. It's now bigger, thank goodness, 50,000 people. But it's on 120 acres that we gradually added as a family as we could to keep the woods from being demolished and turned into housing areas. And the property that the museum, Crystal Bridges, sits on is known as the property was always known as Crystal Springs, because not 50 yards from the south end of the museum is a huge spring called Crystal Springs. And that's actually where the name comes from. So it wasn't a big stretch when I saw Moshe's first rendition of the...
That's Moshe Safdie, the architect.
Yes, the architect is Moshe Safdie. And when I saw his rendition of the building and it being 2 glass bridges, it wasn't too hard to come up with Crystal Bridges. But I wanted that name because I wanted the museum to be a place where people could meet and bridge. All different kinds of people could come together and connect. So I like the name for that reason.
And it's also a preserve. I mean, there are trails. And did you have any idea because it is, it's not just a building. Yeah. It's a whole, it's complex. When you're indoors, you're very aware of the outdoors. And I wondered, I know now it's provided the site for contemporary sculpture. And did you have that in mind when you began? Yes. Yes,
and it took a couple of years to convince my family. You should have seen the eyebrows go up when I brought up this idea. But we talked through it as a family for a couple of years, and one of the things there were things we wanted to achieve, and first of all was access for everyone and a welcoming space. And we also wanted it to be close to downtown so that it would help stimulate the development of the whole downtown area, which was rather old and sleepy at the time. And as with most towns, had grown out to the perimeters, and downtown was kind of being left. So that was part of it too. But the selection of Moshe came really from that. I knew that for the museum to be successful, when we first opened, 85% of our visitors had never been to a museum, which is amazing. And I knew that was going to be the case because they, like me, just didn't have access. It wasn't a part of their lives. And so I knew the one thing people in our part of the world are comfortable with is it's nature. And so how can I knew from the start that the building had to be integrated into nature in a seamless way. And that I wanted, and nature ranks so high in terms of Americans' ideals.
That's true. Yes.
And the whole Hudson River landscape thing. So I wanted that seamless integration, and I knew that from the start. And that led to the selection of Moshe Softy as the architect.
If one were, it's like asking a mother who's your favorite child, but within the collections, are there any works that just especially speak to your heart?
Yes.
Would you be willing to share one or two with us?
Well, if I don't get egg on my face, I have to say Kindred Spirits.
That's an excellent choice.
I love that. I've always loved that painting. Let me see, Martin Johnson's Heeds, The Gems of Brazil. We were
yes.
fortunate enough to
That's
get.
extraordinary. That's the entire suite of paintings of Brazilian hummingbirds that he did, I believe, for the Emperor.
Right.
Original commission was for the Emperor of Brazil, who shared his passion for hummingbirds. Yes, that is quite amazing.
Yeah.
And it's an ensemble.
It is. It's 16 paintings, and they are quite extraordinary, and they're actually amazing, beautiful miniature landscapes as well.
Yes, they're all in situ. I mean, it's really like a natural history diorama.
Yeah, yeah. Then I would go to Jimson Weed, Georgia O'Keeffe, which I love. It's been traveling almost since we got it, so I hope it comes back one of these days.
Oh, it will. Well, that's another question. I know that you're generous with loans, and so it's a matter of, in a sense, the site being like an engine that kind of has an influence in the region, and then also a larger region, and then nationally. I know that when we came, Louise Mirror and I came to attend the opening, we flew down, and at the moment at the airport, I stopped to buy, I don't know, a pair of sunglasses or something, and the fellow, in the airport store, he said, you must be here for the museum. And he immediately, he spoke with such pride, as did everyone else. It was really quite extraordinary. I mean, coming from a city like New York that has a great embarrassment of riches in this way, and being New Yorkers, it was actually kind of humbling to see the enthusiasm and real joy and pride. I think, in a sense, thinking about the goals of the collectors that we have been looking at, and that you have been, in a sense, working in an American tradition, the notion of building a great collection and then wanting to share it.
Linda, the thing that has amazed me more than anything, sometimes you have to trust something a lot bigger than yourself. And the first thing I would say about this whole effort is that I knew how important it was that this be done. I just instinctively knew. And I knew I had to do it. I didn't know if I was capable. I was going to do it, is what I would say. But I also understood it was a lot bigger than me. And I feel like, but the thing I didn't understand was how desperately and how broadly and widespread the acceptance and love of the museum would be. So our first year we had 600, it runs about 650,000, 620,000 visitors a year, which is more than 3 million in our 5 years that we're open. So we have been hoping for about 150,000 a year. We had no idea. I mean, you just don't know. So that has been what's been so special, is that people have claimed it for their own. and it brings great pride to the region, which is a wonderful thing, I think.
It's an extraordinary thing, and I think it's also great the number of hands that went up in the room when I asked, who had visited the museum. So it really, you've turned Bentonville into a cultural destination. I know it's been for years, in a sense, a business destination, but now it offers something else that is available nationally and also of extraordinary importance. I assume then you must have very rich and rewarding school programs, lots of kids.
Yes, ma'am. That our focus has been on education from the start, and actually our family foundation focus is education, K-12, and so we will have 50,000 school children come through. Members of our community have put together an endowment, the Walker family leading it, so that we cover all costs for the schools, the buses, substitute teachers, lunch for every child, and they have pre and post study before they come, and then 2.5-hour visit.
Follow-up.
Yeah.
Yes. That's fantastic.
One of the things I will mention is that, excuse me for a second, my nose is acting up.
New York weather.
But one of the things I'll mention is that the University of Arkansas has one of the top education reform analytical schools in the country. Jay Green from Harvard started it. And they came to us when we first opened. They said, there's never been a situation like this. And they said, where nobody's ever had access to a museum, so what does one visit do? He said, this is a unique opportunity to do a major study. And we agreed, and so they did a study of 12,000 children, 6,000 of whom were in the control group that we literally couldn't fit in yet, and 6,000 who had one visit. And 3 months after their two-hour visit, Jay and his group went back and interviewed the 6,000 children. They'd both learned the same lessons, one with the advantage of the museum and the other without. Jay had told me he didn't expect any differences in the study. And they were shocked when the numbers came back. The group that came to the museum had significantly double the recall of the lessons. They had significantly larger historical empathy and tolerance, which is really interesting. That was totally unexpected. And then the other factor is that their logic, their reasoning capabilities, critical thinking skills, I think is what they call it in those tests, were significantly higher. So this study, actually, the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times both published it, and it has been used all over the country in order to get art back into the school. And I'm happy to, and so it's really already had a lot of visit, but what we realized is we have to continue this effort. So we just approved funding for a 10-year study that will continue this and provide some really demonstrative lessons, and I'm sure if they follow this first one, will help us get art back in education.
That's fantastic. Sure. Well, I would just ask Alice, of all of the extraordinary outcomes of this, well, I guess I don't have to ask you what you're proudest of. I mean, in a sense, I think at a time like this, the long-range study is it's interesting how events on a national, international level can suddenly thrust an institution or a project into an even higher profile than, what you started was something, was never local, it was also regional, it certainly is national now, and I think, in a sense, represents a sort of, the best outcome of what you could call a kind of cultural nationalism at a very significant moment in the country's history. And we're all grateful to you, and we're delighted that you were able to come today. And I wondered if I think there's time for a couple of questions. I think you want to open it to all of the speakers, Inga? I know that people
I thought
probably.
we could start with
Okay.
questions for Alice, and then
Okay.
there will be a reception afterwards. And so, if you don't have questions for the other speakers that you want to air publicly, you can talk with them at the reception. We'll give a little time for the public questions too. But first questions for Alice.
I wonder if you would like to speak a little bit more about your own feelings about nature and the siting of the museum and what's going on there architecturally in the relationship with nature.
So our family home is done by an Arkansas architect, Eugene Fay Jones, who actually won the AIA Gold for Thorn Crown Chapel in 1980, a student of Frank Lloyd Wright. So I grew up in a building that was totally a part of nature. I mean, you don't know you're inside. You can't differentiate. And I wanted the museum to have that same connection. And I think people in our part of the woods call it the happy building. And I think it's that connection to nature and openness that makes people so comfortable. And the siding of the museum itself, actually, when you first drive up to the entrance, all you see is a portico. You don't see the museum at all. So you have to come down into it, and it kind of envelops you and then shows you itself kind of piece by piece. But I think all of that and the integration is what has made it so successful in our part of the world. And the other thing we've learned, we have sculpture trails and forests on the whole grounds, almost 6 miles of trails. And we're just still developing that out. But what we've learned is that people that typically don't come in or that are a bit afraid of museums, our Hispanic population, some of them, they'll start out on the trails. And then they see the sculpture and the kids play on the sculpture, which we encourage. And they gradually make their way in. And one of the things I'm proudest of is that actually we've focused really hard, because in 2012 we did a survey and we were not demonstrative of the widespread of diversity in our community. And we said, oh dear, we got to fix this. And I will tell you that in 3 years, we've totally changed that. And we actually have a greater minority population in the museum than exists in the region. So I'm really proud of that. Outreach. We have made a major effort at diversifying our collection so that people see themselves on the walls. We've made a major effort at diversifying our staff and our management and our curators. We're not where we want to be on that side, but we have made a lot of progress in 2 years. And we've made a major effort at reaching out. For instance, in the Hispanic community, it's very church-oriented, and so we found the Hispanic leaders. We now have a Hispanic council. We have Marshallese Island festivals for the We have the largest population of Marshallese Islanders outside of the Marshallese Islands. So, significant Indian population.
That's fantastic.
Other questions?
I got off the subject.
Hi, I wonder if you could, you talk about the, the great audiences you're gaining. I'm just curious about international audiences. I often conduct tours for Europeans from Great Britain to America, and they're so surprised to see these fantastic museums, say the Nelson Atkins, the Cleveland Museum, and your museum is on our radar screen because, you know, I hate the term flyover country because I think there's such richness in the heartland of our country, and you're an example of that. So I'm just curious to know your international visitors.
It's changed a lot. When we first opened, we were 60% Arkansas and 80% first-time museum visitors and 5% coast. And then the other, about 30% was from our touch state, 6 or 8 state area. Today, it's 50% repeat visitors. 60% of those come from all the touch states, and that's been a real shock. We have regular 3 and 4 time a year visitors from all of those states, a lot of them. So they make all the exhibitions. We didn't expect that, but that's happened. And we have about 20% from the coast now, and then about 10% international. We don't have as much international, people in Europe still don't know much about us, and that's one of our goals is to try to help widen the knowledge about it.
Thank you for being here. It's clear that you're the lady that drove this project, and the whole country should be grateful to you. What I'm curious about, and you didn't mention, is did you encounter resistance either from within your family or from the Arkansas politicians or anybody else?
That's a great one. Most of it was from the East Coast. Some of you did not want to see kindred spirits leave. And my answer is I don't blame you. But as in all things, some people, we won the bid, and so we were fortunate to have it. And it's such an important painting for us, and it brings such pride to our region. But my answer is my family's been totally supportive, and it's been a wonderful. All my nieces and nephews have been with me on art buying trips and participated in the process. So it's been a really wonderful thing for our family. And we have not had anything but total support from the region. The misunderstandings early on were people just really didn't understand what we were doing and how important it is to that part of the world. So it doesn't bother me.
I think we have time for just one more question. Come your way.
Hi, thank you. One of the questions that I had for many of the historic collectors we learned about today is how their collecting changed when they knew that they were going to be exhibiting their collections for a public and were no longer just collecting for themselves. And so I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that process for you, this becoming from a personal collection to one you were sharing, and especially in that you knew you were reaching audiences who were not accustomed to coming to museums, if that shaped the kinds of things you're collecting as well.
That's a good question. The first thing I'd say is that I may have just stuck with the watercolors because I still love them the most. But I love the oils too. And, to me, collecting has been a process, a result of my own learning as I go. So we started, I didn't know much about contemporary art. It's still my weakest area. I'm still learning as fast as I can. So we waited to collect contemporary art until Don Boccialupi came on board, that was his specialty, and we now have others as well. But the quality was always there, I think. Even in my early collecting, there aren't many pieces that couldn't go in the museum. maybe they don't want my pottery, but okay.
I think it's interesting to me. I think you've made some rather bold purchases because I spoke in my keynote about the survey, and it's precisely what you set out to do. Once you moved, and that's very true, from the private realm, and realizing that you wanted to create a public institution and present a survey. And I'm sure, and then John probably wrote the last great survey of American art. I think it was published, I think in the 70s, and that kind of book is not particularly in fashion now, as in the scholarly community, and yet those books have shaped the study of American art. They have established many of the icons, and many of your purchases they've certainly covered the art. The quality is uniformly high. Often they are works that come into, like Kindred Spirits, come into the museum with iconic status. But in my experience, I think you're a brave buyer because you've reached the point where if you show interest in something, if something comes into the museum collection that's outside the canon or outside, I'll say, fashion, I think people pay attention. And one of my other boyfriends is William Trost Richards, along with Asher B. Durand and John Mackey Falconer. And the works of his that have been out of fashion for many, many years are the very, very large wave pictures, the propounding surf. And of course, Winslow Homer sort of has that market, in a sense, locked up. And also Richards was about something else, and et cetera, et cetera. Nevertheless, and I was embarrassed when I was working with his granddaughter who said, and that big wave picture that Brooklyn has, and I'm thinking to myself, what big wave picture? And I went back, and the museum had deaccessioned it in 1945. So you bought a great one. And I remember I was stunned. I mean, you have a great American Pre-Raphaelite, Richards, which is fabulous. But then you bought a great rolling wave picture. And I thought, this is fantastic, because as I've grown older, I have come to respect more and more the paintings that he painted at the end of his career. And they're wonderful pictures. They are not in fashion. But what made me even more astonished was when I was told, and you may have told this story, that it's one of the favorites on the wall. And when I was there, I saw people were clustered around it. And do you know why it's such a... Is it because when you live in the northwestern corner of Arkansas, your experience...
With waves is not...
Or with waves, is... but it's...
this painting, you gotta see it. You can look it up on the internet, but come see it. It's a fascinating painting. So we have a long curved, not hallway, but the walls are long and curved. So you kind of get a panorama of the paintings. And I have been so fascinated. I'll sit and watch people as they come by that painting. And it's of waves that are about to crash on you, on the viewer. And they will always make a wide arc and then stop.
That's fascinating.
But people don't want that wave to crash on them. That's how real it is. And so I think that's part of it.
Well, so I would think, I don't know, non-canonical purchases when you set out to create a survey of American art, I think are pretty fascinating, and I applaud you. I really applaud you for that. So
let us all applaud both of you.